Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Kyle Henderson of BamaInsider.com. Today, we're talking recruiting, and we're talking JT Tuimoloau. Bone, give us the latest on a very intriguing prospect.
Yeah, that's right. JT Tuimoloau, out of Washington, state of Washington, just outside of Seattle, Bellevue. He's definitely a guy that we have not talked about a ton over the course of the last, I guess 6, 7 months. He actually visited Alabama, camped in Tuscaloosa during the summer after his freshman year in high school, and that was kind of his first trip to Tuscaloosa. Hasn't been back since, but I think he's planning on, hopefully getting back to Tuscaloosa sometime this fall or after the football season. But what we've been hearing lately is Alabama's kind of really stepped up in terms of recruiting him and talking to him, on a almost on an everyday basis, just reaching out to him, kind of seeing what the interest level is, and he seems to have some interest in Alabama. As of right now, everybody kind of assumes that Ohio State's the leader. If you go to his player profile page, every single future cast is for Ohio State. Currently 100% predicted to Ohio State. But if you also look at it, all of those predictions were in the month of May. There hasn't been any new predictions. So a lot can change in a couple months. And as we've kind of, found out over the course of the last couple of weeks is, Alabama's really kind of stepped up its recruiting efforts in him. They're in the race. Speaking with a source close to JT Tuimoloau, they say that Alabama is in this thing big time. That doesn't mean Alabama's going to get his commitment. I still think, if I was a betting man, I would still put all the money on Ohio State right now. But if they can, if Alabama can keep him from making a decision, anytime soon, and can get him on campus for an official visit or even potentially even for a game. We don't know if recruits are going to be allowed for games this upcoming season. Of course, you never know, how recruits may react with, with a less than full capacity atmosphere. That's going to be something that's going to be pretty interesting this fall. But we know that Alabama is heavily recruiting him. They want him on campus. He has Alabama in his top seven. Now, his top seven's a little, kind of spread out because Alabama is the only SEC team that's in it. You also have Oklahoma, only Big 12 team in it. Ohio State, only Big 10 team in it. But then you have Washington, Oregon, and USC. Now, a lot of people think that he's going to leave the state of Washington. He's got an offer to play basketball from Washington as well. So he's a tremendous athlete, 6'4", 285 pounds, has a basketball offer. You don't see many, basketball players at 285 pounds, but, he's certainly a guy that, you watch his film, he's not only a great defensive lineman, he's also a great tight end. He can certainly move for a big man. And I think most schools are recruiting him strictly as a defensive lineman, but hey, I don't think anybody would have a problem if he ended up moving to the tight end position. But as of right now, just a defensive lineman. So those, like I mentioned, those were the top 7 schools that are in the race for him. The 3 Pac-12 schools: USC, Oregon, Washington, and then you have Oklahoma, Ohio State. I forgot to mention Michigan. Michigan was another Big 10 school that's in the race, and then Alabama. So obviously only can get 5 official visits. We'll see if he ends up making an official to Alabama at some point. But as of right now, they're in the race.
Bone, just as you said, I mean, you look at this type of prospect, I mean, the athleticism is pretty incredible. I saw some highlights of him playing tight end, getting after the quarterback, really impressed overall. Who's recruiting JT, and kind of if you could talk about the recruitment of him in terms of which coaches are reaching out to him to really pull a big-time West Coast prospect to Alabama. And I can't even imagine if he jumps on board, because we've already talked about this class. We've already talked about how special it already is. I mean, getting a prospect like JT Tuimoloau to jump on board would just be a slam dunk kind of on the backside of this class of 2021. So who's recruiting him, and how big of an impact and what a statement that would be if Alabama is able to continue to foster this relationship and land a prospect like JT Tuimoloau?
Yeah, well, Coach Sark, Steve Sarkisian is his lead recruiter. Obviously very connected on the West Coast. Was once the head coach at the University of Washington. Freddie Rose, defensive line coach, also Pete Golding and Nick Saban. Also can throw in the strength and conditioning coaches. It's all hands on deck when it comes to recruiting JT Tuimoloau. So, they're certainly trying to make him feel like a top priority. But we'll see what happens, in this recruiting race, because everybody keeps kind of assuming that the race for the number 1 spot may end up coming down to Alabama and Ohio State. Ohio State's been number 1, for the last several months. People think they're a shoe in for number one, but I think Alabama's really going to make things interesting in the upcoming months with some more big commitments. And you never know. There's some guys that both schools are heavily involved in. Some five-star guys. Tuimoloau Adelie, who's a five-star defensive line commitment for Ohio State, he's still considering Alabama. And then obviously JT Tuimoloau, considering both schools. So a commitment from one of those guys to Alabama as opposed to going to Ohio State could go a long way in determining the final Rivals.com rankings come February.
I know we're talking about JT Tuimoloau right now, but is there anything new on Tuimoloau Adelie as we push towards the month of August? You mentioned that Alabama is still in contact. Alabama, they certainly still have a shot. Is there anything latest to report on Tuimoloau Adelie?
Not a ton. I mean, Alabama's still in it. They're still heavily pursuing him. Jeff Banks is not the lead recruiter for IMG Academy, but he was the lead recruiter for Tuimoloau Adelie when he was in Texas. And, that relationship has continued for the last couple of years. But Charles Huff, the running backs coach for Alabama, who's doing such a tremendous job this year, probably the front runner for Rivals Recruiter of the Year, recruits IMG Academy. So he's recruiting Tuimoloau Adelie. And, Ja'Cory Brooks, J.C. Latham, both teammates for Tuimoloau this fall. So you can bet that both of those guys are going to be heavily recruiting him to join them at Alabama.
Before we go, I want to get some other key targets at the strong side defensive end position. We're talking about JT Tuimoloau, but could you also add in a couple other guys that Alabama has on their radar at that position?
Yeah, well, he's not the only five-star that they are recruiting at strong side defensive end. Now, they're also recruiting Corey Foreman, the number one player in the country, and according to Rivals.com out of California. Tuimoloau Adelie, who we've mentioned on the show already. Chambry Jackson out of Orlando, Shamar Turner out of Texas, and also Monkel Goodwine out of Maryland, number one player in the state of Maryland. So those are all guys that they're heavily recruiting. I think Alabama really is trying to sign, three strong side defensive ends in this year's recruiting class. I feel like they've got a really good chance to pick up one here in the next couple of weeks in Monkel Goodwine. And most of these other guys probably going to wait a while before making a decision. But if they can get Goodwine on board here in a couple of weeks, it'd certainly be a great start.
Great stuff, Andrew. For more recruiting coverage, go to BamaInsider.com. But before we go, we want to give a shout out to our BamaInsider.com loyalty program members. We got the Touchdown Club on the left, and we got the Loyalty Club on the right. Thank you so much for your support right here on BamaInsider.com. If you're curious about our loyalty program, just hit the join button at the bottom of this video. Of course, many ways to get on BamaInsider.com and contribute to the staff right here at BamaInsider.com. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll catch you next time right here on BamaInsider.com.